just kind of, it's quite general questions to do with psychology, but I just kind of want you, because I think that's something really interesting you've got to sort of offer the students, because you're coming from this field, and I have to admit it's not a field I've that much knowledge with outside of like learning theory.
Yes.
So you kind of talked earlier on. So would you see yourself as an environmental psychologist, or is that a simplification, or do you see it as a behaviourist? Or?
No. I'm an environmental psychologist, and I come with a fairly strong social background. So I've also done a degree in social psychology. So a lot of my work does revolve around focus on social interaction, social learning, social cohesion. I'm very much into social processes.
Right.
One of the areas that, interestingly, I think in the context of interpretation, one of the areas that environmental psychologists are interested in is place identity, place attachment.
Right.
And so again, it was not difficult for me to somehow meld and work together the areas of interpretation and environmental psychology, because environmental psychologists are interested in how and why do people identify with particular places, what is it about, what is it that confers meaning on a place, and so on. And that, after all, is what a lot of interpreters are in fact trying to do as well. In terms of psychology and learning, I've tried. I can give you some references.
That'd be good. I was going to ask you that as well. Actually, that would be super.
Which try to move away very much from kind of behaviourist kind of thinking. Really, it's not one I sit comfortably with, because the idea of evaluation of that I was talking about, of exhibitions whereby people learn from stimulus material and they respond. Is a very classic behaviourist model, which we know doesn't work.
Right.
We knew years ago that people read 10 to 20% of the material on our exhibition panel, but don't read it. So, so place and place identity, place attachment is something that certainly psychologists are interested in.
I suppose as well, you were talking about, when we started talking, we were talking about evaluating techniques.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. I was just, thought occurred to me just as you started. I suppose no, absolutely not. No, I suppose the other thing, as a psychologist, psychology is a science,
right.
And one of the things that I always tell my students with our master's course in environmental psychology is that the training gives them a scientific training in research methods.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I've also been, in relation to interpretation, psychologists do a lot of work on attitudes, values, behaviour, and so on. And if we look at Freeman Tilden, Freeman Tilden said, through interpretation, through appreciation, understanding, through understanding. Sorry, I've probably got it wrong, so don't quote me.
Absolutely, I know. We'll
do you know that? Do you know that thing?
Yeah, I know that thing.
Well, you can do that expression. You can actually. It's through understanding, appreciation, conservation, something like that. And you can translate that directly into psychological terms. Through understanding, the cognitive, through appreciation, the affective, through that, and that in turn leads to conservation. Or knowledge leads to attitudes, leads to behaviour. Now that, knowledge, understanding, appreciation, conservation, knowledge, attitudes, behaviour, is a very common model used to be certainly in psychology. It's still a common model used by government in campaigns to try and change people's behaviour. The assumption being is if you can raise their levels of awareness, enhance their understanding, that will lead to a change in attitudes, which in turn will lead to a change in behaviour. And that was the underlying assumption of Children's dictum, as it were. But of course, for psychologists, that's really problematic, because we know that information doesn't necessarily lead to information change. If it did, people wouldn't smoke, you know, they wouldn't drink too much, they wouldn't do all sorts of things, they wouldn't, you know, throw their polythene bags away, or whatever it is. And so that linkage between understanding attitudes and behaviour as well. So we know again, so I made a leap there, but simply giving people information, raising their understanding, doesn't necessarily change their attitudes.
Yeah.
And people can often change their attitudes without it being possible to discern an increase in their knowledge.
Right.
We know that from research too.
Okay.
So that's not going to be necessarily a good predictor. We also know from research that in some cases it may be better to change people's behaviour first, and that will lead to a change in attitudes.
Right. Okay.
So a good example of that might be smoking in pubs, crash helmets, seatbelts,
Right.
where that is imposed, people are forced to do it. They may object, but they're forced to do it. Then after a while they realise it's actually quite a sensible thing. The environment is better, it's not so smoky, they're less likely, you know, if they have an accident, they're going to be safe, and all that. So I think psychology is really quite important in a way, because it provides it can provide a theoretical framework and a critique for looking at commonly held assumptions in interpretation.
Right.
You know, because I think there's a lot of stuff, bit of a throwaway line that, but some things that interpreters do, I mean, it's based on kind of gut feeling from the hip. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah,
And I think we need to know why it does and why it doesn't. Yeah. And I think if you can start to explain it theoretically, you have a better understanding. And it might lead you to doing different things in interpretation terms.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. So I mean, I think it'd be good if you could give me some stuff to give the students, because you know I can see those sort of like more like complex evaluating tools that aren't simply measuring what's easy to measure.
Yes,
and you know, but I think that's I think that's really good. And you know, I think that's an element that's easy for students to forget about. It's easy for interpreters when they're creating all this stuff and the throes of it all to be thinking of what's going to actually happen to it.
Yes.
Okay, that's good.